Welcome to the journey of science and sleep. This is the moment for you to relax, to let each breath become lighter, and to let your mind drift along with a story that has stretched over millions of years. Tonight, we will explore one of the greatest journeys in natural history, the slow yet extraordinary evolution of Homo sapiens. If you enjoy journeys like this, please hit subscribe to accompany the channel and don't take your eyes off until the very end, because I believe this journey will bring you more than just relaxation. Imagine an African morning millions of years ago. The sky is gray after the rain, the air still carrying the scent of damp earth, and in the dense forest canopy, small creatures with bright, alert eyes are leaping from branch to branch. These are the early primates, our distant ancestors. Not giants, nor exceptionally intelligent beings, but merely small, agile bodies, quietly struggling to survive in a world full of uncertainty. The starting point of the Homo sapiens story does not lie on an evolutionary throne, but in the fragility of beings just skillful enough to cling to branches, cunning enough to find ripe fruit, and resilient enough to stay clear of predators' fangs. Tiny hooked hands, flexible legs, forward-facing eyes, all those seemingly ordinary details were in fact the seeds for the future of humankind. In the rainforest environment, life never stood still. Trees grew and fell, seasons of ripe fruit alternated with scarcity, and the creatures that endured were those who knew how to adapt. The ability to cross branches required eyes to gauge distances. The need to seek diverse foods demanded hands capable of grasping skillfully. Living in groups to resist predators sparked another seed, social intelligence. Within those primate troops, instincts to recognize faces, remember relationships, and learn cooperation were the first rehearsals for the complexity of human communities to come. Then time passed. For more than 50 million years, primate lineages spread across continents, from Africa and Asia to as far as North America. Some species vanished as the climate grew harsher, while others adapted, transformed, and left traces in fossil bones and in the DNA that we still decode today. It is in those fossil layers that scientists found stories both familiar and strange. A species with a monkey-like face but an upright stance, another still clinging tightly to trees but whose feet had begun to practice stepping on the ground. Around 7 million years ago, a new chapter opened. This was the period when scientists believed the ancestors of humankind began to diverge from the common ancestors of chimpanzees. This split was not noisy, with no historic moment to mark it, but rather countless small changes accumulated over time, like branches slowly parting. Names like Sahelanthropus chidensis, Aurorin tugenensis, or Ardipithecus ramidus appear in the fossil record, not as true humans, but as natural experiments, blending old traits with new. What is strange about these creatures is that we see both the shadow of apes and glimpses of the future of humans. A small skull with a brain size less than a third of that of Homo sapiens, but the foramen magnum shifting downward, suggesting upright walking. Hands still suited for climbing, yet pelvis and legs showing signs of ground movement. They seem to be standing at a threshold, testing whether it was possible to step into a different way of life, one that would later define humanity. Why was walking upright so important? In a world where forests thinned and grasslands expanded, standing upright allowed eyes to see farther, spotting predators early in tall grass. It also freed the hands so they could pick fruit, carry food, or later, craft tools. Bipedalism may not have been a perfect step forward. It made the body slower in many situations, but it opened new survival opportunities in an environment that never stopped changing. From here, evolution resembled a flow, slow yet persistent. Each species appeared and disappeared, but left traces for the next generation. Smaller teeth, larger skulls, steadier strides, all these tiny changes gradually etched the silhouette of humanity. What is remarkable is that there was no grand design for this process. Evolution was simply the selection of the environment, the survival of what fit, and the disappearance of what could not adapt in time. If we look at the evolutionary tree, we will see that humans are not the pinnacle, but just one of countless branches. There were lineages parallel to ours that once existed. Hominins who walked upright, used tools, perhaps even knew primitive art, but only one branch survived to this day. The question, why us, remains, and the answer likely lies in a combination of countless factors: intelligence, language, social cooperation, and even the random events of nature. As night falls, imagine yourself sitting by a fire, hearing the wind howl across the savannah and gazing up at the sky where stars have shone for millions of years. There, you do not see just the story of one species, but the epic of life itself. From the tiny creatures clinging to branches to the first footsteps on the grasslands, all coming together to pave the way for Homo sapiens. And that journey, though it began long ago, is still continuing in every cell, every thought, every dream of ours today. About 2.5 million years ago, on the open plains of East Africa, the appearance of a small species marked a new turning point in the evolutionary journey. Homo habilis, a name given by scientists that means handy man. At first glance, Homo habilis was nothing remarkable. Short-bodied, only about 1.3 meters tall, with a modest skull and a brain capacity less than half that of modern humans. But hidden in their hands was something extraordinary, the ability to make tools. Those roughly chipped stones, those sharp fragments they created, opened an entirely new world for the human lineage. Before Homo habilis, our ancestors relied mainly on physical strength, climbing ability, and speed to evade predators. But when hands could turn lifeless stones into knives, hammers, and tools to cut meat or crack bones, the balance of survival began to shift. A small primate, once weak compared to giant predators, suddenly held a weapon that changed the game. Archaeological findings at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, show that Homo habilis knew how to use pebbles, striking them together to create sharp edges. With these stone blades, they could slice meat from carcasses left behind by lions, break bones to access marrow, a rich source of nutrition. This dietary change created evolutionary pressure on the brain. With the high energy from fat and protein, the brain, that the most energy-consuming organ, now had the chance to grow stronger. From there, a new spiral began. Tools brought more food, the brain developed further, dexterity of the hands increased, tools became more refined. This was the evolutionary loop that laid the foundation for later intelligence. But Homo habilis was not only skillful with their hands. In their social life, they also showed notable progress. Archaeological evidence suggests they lived in small groups, perhaps a few dozen individuals, sharing food and protecting one another. The concept of cooperation, a crucial factor in the later success of Homo sapiens, began to take root here. Imagine an African sunset 2.5 million years ago. Against a crimson sky, a group of Homo habilis gathered around the carcass of an antelope abandoned by lions. The crude stones in their hands glinted in the evening light, each strike, each sharp crack, sounding like a declaration that evolution had turned a page. It was not just about food, but about proof. This small species had found a way to use intelligence to compensate for physical weakness. Yet their lives were far from easy. Without fire to keep warm or ward off predators, Homo habilis still depended on the safe cover of trees. They still had to be wary of lions, hyenas, or leopards. Stone tools were useful only in certain situations, and their small bodies still made them easy prey. But what mattered was that they had begun a different way of life, a life of crafting, of transforming nature to serve themselves. About 1 million years later, from the foundation laid by Homo habilis, another species emerged, Homo erectus, upright man. And it was they who truly carried the story of evolution further. With taller stature, broader skulls, and above all, mastery of fire, Homo erectus stepped beyond the limits of ordinary primates. Fire, an invention seemingly simple, was in fact a great turning point. Thanks to fire, Homo erectus could cook food, making it easier to digest and releasing more energy for the brain. Thanks to fire, they could stay warm in the cold night, drive away predators, and expand their living range to places once uninhabitable. Fire was not just a tool, but a symbol of human power over nature. From Africa, Homo erectus began long migrations, placing the first footprints of humankind beyond the homeland continent. Their remains have been found in Asia and Europe, evidence of remarkable endurance and adaptability. They were no longer just the handyman like Homo habilis, but had become conquerors of space. What is wondrous is that in this process, Homo erectus not only improved stone tools, but also showed the first signs of abstract thought. Some archaeological sites suggest they may have arranged stones or bones in a certain order, as if to send a message. These were the earliest seeds of culture, of art, of a spirit that reached beyond mere survival. Looking back, we see Homo habilis and Homo erectus as two consecutive chapters in a long book. Homo habilis held the first stone, opening the ability to transform nature. Homo erectus held the first fire, opening the ability to control nature, and both, with steps small yet persistent, laid the foundation for Homo sapiens, modern humans, to appear later. The old stones, the fossil bones, the traces of fire still marked in caves, these are not just remnants but whispers from the past. They remind us that human history was not written by sudden leaps, but by millions of slow, continuous steps through countless trials. And in those ancient echoes, we can still hear the heartbeat of Homo habilis, the first handyman, resonating with us today. Homo erectus, the first upright humans, not only left fossil traces scattered across continents, but also opened a new chapter in the story of evolution. If Homo habilis is remembered as the earliest craftsman, then Homo erectus brought the image of a species full of strength, endurance, and boldness, daring to break free from the cradle of Africa to step into the wider world. It was they who laid the foundation for the form, rhythm of life, and spirit of adventure that we still carry in our blood today. The first striking feature of Homo erectus was their physique. Tall, with sturdy bones, long legs, and arched feet, they almost bore the physique of a modern marathon runner. No longer hunched like earlier species, erectus carried within them an endurance-driven ability to move, with a unique adaptation, persistence hunting. This was not a noisy ambush like a lion's pounce, nor as swift as a cheetah's chase, but it was a deadly weapon: patience. Homo erectus could chase an antelope for hours under the scorching sun until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. The combination of a body built for long distances and the ability to cool through sweat glands made them the long-distance athletes of the natural world. However, it was not only their physique that set erectus apart. Their brains, with a capacity of about 900 seminicuiters, had come closer to the scale of modern humans. This size was not merely an expansion of gray matter, but opened the way for planning, group coordination, and more sophisticated toolmaking than ever before. The teardrop-shaped hand axes, characteristic of the Acheulean culture, were no longer crude broken stones. They were crafted with symmetry, sharpness, aesthetics, and, above all, versatility. A single axe could cut meat, scrape hides, dig roots, and shape wood. These were not just tools, but proof of a mind that could think beyond immediate needs. The appearance of fire was perhaps the greatest turning point. Although scientists still debate the exact timing, much archaeological evidence from Africa to the Middle East and Asia shows that Erectus knew how to use and even control fire nearly 1 million years ago. That fire not only brought warmth in the dark night and drove away predators, but also fundamentally changed their diet. Cooked food was easier to digest, released more energy, and most importantly, was safer. One could say fire was the invisible tool that nourished the Erectus brain, enriching their bodies and pushing intellectual growth. It is no surprise that many anthropologists call it humanity's foundational technology. Picture, if you will, an ancient evening. A group of Homo erectus gathered around a fire, sharing the meat they had just hunted. Firelight reflected on their faces, laughter mingling with the sizzling sound of roasting meat. This was not just a meal, but a moment of connection. Fire became the center of social life, a place to teach skills, recount memories, and perhaps the starting point of the first oral culture. In that glow, Homo erectus discovered a new rhythm of existence, the rhythm of community. But Homo erectus did not stop there. They were also born travelers. Archaeological evidence shows their footprints and fossil bones stretching from Africa to East Asia, as far as the Indonesian archipelago. These were not short-lived adventures, but migrations lasting hundreds of thousands of years, each of their footsteps inscribed onto the world map, making Erectus the first truly global humans. Expanding their range not only gave them access to new food sources, but also enabled them to adapt to diverse environments, from the scorching African grasslands to the tropical forests of Southeast Asia and the cold steppes. Of course, life for Erectus was not easy. They still faced giant predators, harsh climates, and the fragility of short lifespans. Yet with tools, with fire, with cooperation, they endured for nearly 2 million years, longer than any other species of the genus Homo. This endurance is what makes Erectus regarded as the silent heroes of evolution. Another thought provoking aspect is the sustainability of Erectus culture. For hundreds of thousands of years, Acheulean hand axes changed very little. From a modern perspective, this might seem slow progress, but in reality, this stability proved efficiency. Their tools were sufficient for survival, enough to sustain generations, and most importantly, enough to maintain a cultural tradition longer than any other technological lineage thereafter. One could say that Erectus chose certainty over hasty innovation. What is remarkable is that in those polished stones we can glimpse the future. The symmetry of hand axes suggests that the Erectus mind was not only focused on utility, but also appreciated beauty and harmony. And if they could sense beauty, then within them must have already been the stirrings of art, of creativity beyond immediate needs. Looking back, we see Homo erectus not merely as another step in evolution. They were the pathfinders. They embodied physical endurance, burgeoning intellect, refined craftsmanship, a close relationship with fire, and an endless drive to move. All these elements combined to create a vast legacy, a legacy upon which Homo sapiens, their inheritors, built the story of humanity. In the eyes of science, Erectus may be extinct, but in our nature today, in every long run, in every creative idea, in every tireless journey, their imprint remains intact. They were the bridge between primal darkness and the light of civilization, between survival instinct and the desire to conquer. And perhaps it was from those first steps out of Africa that the story of humankind truly began to take flight. Around 1.8 million years ago, an epic chapter of humanity began. Our ancestors, the Homo erectus, upright man, started leaving Africa, the cradle of life, to step into lands where no human had ever set foot. Not through grand plans of conquest, but simply from the need to search for food, water, and safer environments. Yet it was precisely those seemingly small steps that opened up a journey shaping the destiny of all humankind. What made Homo erectus special was their extraordinary adaptability. They did not stop at a single environment, but knew how to adjust their lifestyle according to where they arrived. In the dry, hot grasslands of Africa, they hunted large animals, depending on meat and bones for survival. When they reached the jungles of Southeast Asia, their diet had to shift from seeds, roots, and forest fruits to small animals. In colder northern climates, fire became the key to survival, providing warmth, protection, and helping them cook food to absorb more nutrients. No place could completely hinder their steps. Each challenge was simply a new lesson to adapt. Imagine a small group of Homo erectus, just a few families, passing through ice-covered mountain valleys, following massive rivers, and suddenly stopping at a sheltered cave. There, fire was kindled from dry branches, animal bones scattered around their seats, and children's laughter echoed in brief moments of safety. That is the image recreating endurance and community spirit, which allowed this species to survive for nearly 2 million years, a span far longer than the existence of modern Homo sapiens. But the journey of Homo erectus was not only about survival, it also reflected the power of spread and diversity. As they moved across continents, they carried with them small variations in morphology. People in Indonesia had thick skulls and strong bones, while groups in China showed adaptations to colder climates. These differences did not erase their shared identity. On the contrary, they proved that evolution is a mosaic, where each fragment reflects environmental pressures and living conditions. In that mosaic, Homo erectus was the patient artist, creating countless versions of themselves to experiment with the world. Their tools, though simple, were proof of persistent thinking. The Acheulean hand axe, with its sharp, easy-to-hold design, remained nearly unchanged for over 1 million years. Modern humans might look at it and wonder, why not create more? But that very stability shows a truth. If a tool has proven effective, perfecting it is more important than constantly innovating. In the hands of Homo erectus, that axe was not just an object, it was an extension of the body, a symbol of slow yet steady adaptation. Alongside tools, fire was the most magnificent legacy Homo erectus left to humanity. Before fire, the night was full of dangers. After fire, light and warmth opened a new era. Cooked food, communities gathered around flames, safety from wild beasts. Each spark struck from stone or dry branch was not only a technique, but also a symbol of spiritual progress. It bound people together, turning them into tighter social groups, knowing how to share and cooperate more. Perhaps it was precisely by the firelight that the earliest seeds of language, primitive sounds, gestures, cries were formed, laying the foundation for complex communication later. What is astonishing is that despite living in harsh conditions, predators lurking, diseases prowling, sudden weather changes, Homo erectus persisted. Many small groups may have vanished without a trace, but the footprints left stretching from Africa all the way to the island of Java are evidence that resilience can surpass even nature itself. They were not grand conquerors, but resilient survivors, paving the way for all of us. From the present, we may easily think of Homo erectus as just a past rung in evolution, but in truth, their legacy still lives on in every step, every breath of modern humans. When we run long distances, our muscles echo the endurance they once needed to chase prey. When we gather around a campfire in the forest, it is the ancient memory resounding from the cold nights of Homo erectus. And when we never stop yearning to explore, reaching for new horizons, it is the adventurous instinct that once pushed our ancestors to leave Africa. Homo erectus, in a sense, were the first explorers of humanity. They left no cities, carved no stone tablets, wrote no books, but they left behind something deeper: adaptability, endurance, and a legacy spread across the planet. Thanks to them, the evolutionary path opened for Homo sapiens to follow. And if today we call ourselves a global species, we must remember that the very first footsteps that laid the foundation belonged to Homo erectus. When Homo erectus still left footprints across many continents, a new chapter of humanity was gradually unfolding in Europe and Western Asia. In the ice-covered caves of the Ice Age, another kind of human arose: the Neanderthal. Stocky, powerful, with a short and sturdy build, they endured for hundreds of thousands of years amid the harshest conditions Earth had ever tested. Modern humans today still carry a portion of their genetic memory, proof that they were not only ancient neighbors, but also blood relatives. For a long time, Neanderthals were mistaken as crude and violent, but archaeological discoveries have painted a far more nuanced picture. Skeletons reveal their exceptional muscular strength: broad chests to keep warm in the cold, strong arms to wield spears, sturdy thighs to hold firm on rugged terrain. They faced mammoths, bison, or woolly rhinoceroses not only with strength, but also with strategy and teamwork. The injuries found on their bones resemble those of modern rodeo athletes, scars from direct confrontations with giant beasts. This reveals that for Neanderthals, hunting was a collective art, where coordination, ambush, and environmental knowledge were as important as raw muscle power. Not only did they hunt, but they also crafted tools. Many stone fragments were meticulously shaped into knives, points, or scrapers, tools belonging to the Mousterian culture, showing a high level of specialization. Each tool served a clear function. Along with stone, they used wood and bone, though these rarely survived in the archaeological record. Each small artifact is a message from the past that Neanderthals knew how to observe, experiment, and improve. What astonishes most is the evidence of their compassion. Many remains have been found showing individuals with severe injuries, missing arms, broken bones, who nevertheless survived for many years. This could only have happened if the community cared for and protected them. In the harsh world of the Ice Age, such kindness was not a luxury, but proof of solidarity. Neanderthals did not survive by strength alone, but also through invisible social bonds. And beyond that, they knew spiritual expression. In caves in Spain, red ochre markings dating back 65,000 years have been found, evidence they used color to paint or mark long before Homo sapiens set foot in Europe. Some other sites suggest they may have buried their dead, sometimes with flowers and objects. Though still debated, these traces indicate that Neanderthals pondered life and death, creating small rituals that reflected abstract thought. In the flickering firelight, perhaps they told one another stories, passing memories down through generations. Alongside the Neanderthals, in the east lay another hidden human branch, the Denisovans. While Neanderthals left thousands of remains, the Denisovans seemed to vanish into the shadows, leaving only a few fragments of bone and teeth in the Denisova cave in Siberia. In 2008, when a finger bone was discovered and its DNA analyzed, the world was astonished. It belonged neither to Neanderthals nor to Homo sapiens, but to an entirely different lineage. The Denisovans lived, loved, hunted, and mingled with our ancestors, yet left so few traces that they have become almost a ghost in history. Even so, their legacy is far from faint. Modern humans in Papua New Guinea, Australia, Melanesia, and parts of East Asia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. Some genetic variants from them helped humans today adapt to harsh environments. On the Tibetan Plateau, people have a special ability to transport oxygen efficiently in thin air, a direct gift from their Denisovan ancestors. Without this genetic exchange, the story of human life on the roof of the world might have been very different. The appearance of the Denisovans remains a mystery. Some massive teeth and a jawbone found in Tibet suggest they may have been large, possibly even surpassing Neanderthals. But beyond that, most of their features remain shrouded in darkness. These gaps make them both familiar and distant, a branch of relatives we can only glimpse through the lens of DNA. Though little is known, the existence of the Denisovans has rewritten our understanding of the human family tree. It proves that human history was not a straight line, but a tangled bush where many branches grew side by side, sometimes intertwining, sometimes vanishing, yet all contributing to our genetic map today. The Neanderthals, with their strength, care, and early art. The Denisovans, with their silent yet profound genetic legacy. Both remind us that humanity was never the sole domain of Homo sapiens. We are only one of many branches, and if today only we remain, that does not mean the others were lesser. On the contrary, they proved the diversity and resilience of humankind over hundreds of thousands of years. When cold winds swept the European plains, when snow blanketed the Altai Mountains, there were human communities who lived, loved, and buried one another in silence. They left us bones, tools, fragments of DNA in our blood, and above all, the lesson that to be human is not only to exist, but to connect, to create, and to leave behind a legacy for the future. When the early groups of Homo sapiens began to walk across the African plains, they did not only carry stone tools and survival knowledge, but also an invisible treasure, imagination and social bonds. These two elements shaped the future of humankind. Every fire lit in the darkness was not only to ward off wild beasts, but also the focal point for stories, for shared memories, for budding beliefs about the world. In that firelight, the seeds of human culture were planted. At that time, nature was always harsh. Climate cycles constantly shifted, from lush grasslands suddenly turning into barren deserts. A river could feed an entire community in the rainy season, but become a deadly trap when drought struck. Homo sapiens were forced to become masters of adaptability. They did not only make tools for hunting, but also learned how to plan, store, and even change strategies when prey disappeared or resources ran out. Intelligence was no longer a luxury, but a weapon for survival. What was special about Homo sapiens was their ability to connect beyond the boundaries of a small family. They knew how to cooperate in large groups, share food, exchange tools, and perhaps even information. These social networks created a tremendous advantage. An invention or a valuable experience was not limited to one individual, but could spread throughout the community. The more groups communicated, the faster progress became. This was the very first nucleus of collective intelligence, the factor that set humans above their evolutionary relatives. Archaeological evidence from many sites shows leaps in toolmaking. No longer just crude shards of broken stone, Homo sapiens knew how to prepare stone cores, anticipate the shape before splitting them, and use different types of materials. This proved the ability for abstract thinking. They did not only react instantly to the environment, but also envisioned the tool before it came into existence. In this process, a revolution of cognition took place. Humans began to see the world not only with their eyes, but also with their creative minds. Alongside tools, traces of ochre pigments and pierced seashells reveal another aspect: symbolism. Though their exact meaning remains a mystery, the colored marks and ornaments suggest that Homo sapiens began to link objects with concepts, going beyond mere practicality. These may have been the first steps toward art, early beliefs, and self-awareness within a vast universe. Once humans had the ability to assign symbolic meaning to things, they opened the door to culture and spirituality. The development of the brain also went hand in hand with changes in the body. Unlike the strong, stocky Neanderthals, Homo sapiens had slender bodies, long legs, and a build suited for endurance movement. They were not the fastest, not the strongest, but they could pursue prey for hours, even days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. This ability of persistence hunting, combined with group organization, made Homo sapiens the most patient hunters in natural history. However, true power did not only come from muscles, but from language. Though there is no direct evidence, many scientists believe that early Homo sapiens possessed a primitive form of language, enough to convey instructions, share experiences, and bond communities. Language allowed them to recount hunts, warn of dangers, and gradually weave myths, the shared stories that held communities together. In speech, culture began to have its own memory, rising above the brief lives of individuals. Gradually, Homo sapiens communities did not only survive, but spread. Then, they left Africa, crossed green corridors opened by climate, and settled in many new lands. Every step away from their homeland was a challenge, but also a victory. They had to adapt to freezing climates, to vast steppes, or to harsh coastlines. And in each place, Homo sapiens not only survived, but transformed themselves to fit. The genetic diversity from the earliest days in Africa helped them adapt, allowing them to become the only species that remains today. But perhaps the most important thing Homo sapiens carried on that journey was imagination. They could envision tools that did not yet exist, picture the afterlife, or believe in invisible symbols. From that, they built art, rituals, and ultimately civilization. The first steps of Homo sapiens were not only a race for survival, but also the laying of bricks for a species that could dream, create, and pass knowledge on. This journey was never a straight line. It was full of twists, challenges, and losses. Many of our relatives, such as Neanderthals or Denisovans, disappeared. But Homo sapiens continued, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the most adaptable, the most connected, and the most creative. From small groups hidden in African forests, they gradually became the writers of Earth's history. And when we look back at fossil remains, at stone tools, or at ancient bones, we do not only see the form of a species long gone, but also see ourselves. Because those early Homo sapiens with their rounded skulls, their curious eyes, their skillful hands, were us only a few 100,000 years ago on the same planet. The migration out of Africa did not unfold like a glorious expedition, but rather like underground streams quietly seeping, gradually spreading across the world. Small groups of Homo sapiens left their familiar homeland, not out of a dream of domination, but simply to seek water, food, and survival. Every step taken out of the African continent was a turning point in human history, opening new chapters full of challenges and opportunities. The first path led them to the Middle East, where they encountered other human species that had already existed, the Neanderthals and Denisovans. These encounters may have been both tense and blended. Archaeology and genetics show that our ancestors not only competed with other humans, but also interbred, leaving in the genomes of modern humans today indelible traces. About 2-3% of the DNA of present-day Europeans and Asians is a legacy from Neanderthals, while in some communities of Southeast Asia and Oceania, the traces of Denisovans still remain. This shows that the interaction of humankind was not only through tools or culture, but also inscribed in the very bloodline. What is remarkable is that despite facing robust human species long adapted to harsh environments, Homo sapiens still prevailed. Their advantage did not lie only in physical strength, but mainly in imagination and flexible cooperation. Small groups that could organize, share information, and transmit experience through language were able to confront challenges larger than themselves. This was the turning point that made Homo sapiens the only surviving species in the evolutionary journey. From the Middle East, humans spread into Europe. There, ice and dense forests created a harsh backdrop. Yet it was here that primitive art flourished. In caves such as Chauvet or Lascaux in France, our ancestors left behind magnificent paintings of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and herds of wild horses. These images were not merely art, but proof of imagination, the ability to see beyond the present, to create symbols, to connect the community through shared meaning. One could say that art was born from spiritual need, and it was precisely that need which helped Homo sapiens endure through the storms of the Ice Age. At the same time, another branch moved eastward. They crossed the treacherous Himalayas, finding their way into India and Southeast Asia. Archaeological evidence in Sri Lanka shows that more than 45,000 years ago, humans already used bows and sophisticated tools to hunt forest animals and birds in tropical rainforests, an environment entirely different from the African savanna. It was this flexibility, the ability to live in savannas, rainforests, mountains, and even icy regions, that made Homo sapiens a truly global species. One of the most extraordinary journeys was the migration into Australia about 50,000 years ago. To reach this land, humans had to cross seas, an unprecedented challenge. Their success proves that Homo sapiens were not only walkers, but also explorers who knew how to use rafts or rudimentary boats. In Australia, they encountered giant animals, giant kangaroos, ground sloths, and carnivorous marsupials. Within just a few thousand years, the presence of humans, along with climate change, contributed to the extinction of many species. This was the first sign that Homo sapiens had begun to emerge as a force capable of reshaping the global ecosystem. Around 40,000 years ago, humans also set foot in icy Siberia, a land both harsh and full of opportunity. Those who survived there developed leather clothing, tents, and tools adapted to long winters. From Siberia, around 20,000 years ago, some groups crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. That was the first step that brought Homo sapiens to the New World, where they quickly spread from Alaska down to South America, facing mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats. In just a few thousand years, humans spanned from North to South America, a clear testament to the desire to conquer new living spaces. What makes these migrations extraordinary was not just the geographical distance, but the patience across generations. None of them intended to go around the world. But step by step, small group by small group, seasonal migrations following herds, they wove the great map of migration. This was not a plan, but the result of countless small choices, repeated over thousands of years. More importantly, that journey reshaped Homo sapiens themselves. Each new land was a test of resilience, of creativity, and of cultural adaptability. Harsh environments did not only select for physical endurance, but also trained intellect and cooperation. From this, humans not only survived, but also developed culture, language, and identity. In the end, looking back, we see that Homo sapiens were not the strongest or the fastest species. What allowed them to rise was their ability to move, to adapt, and to imagine. Every migration was a testament to the endurance of the mind and spirit, and it was thanks to this journey that, from small groups of people by the rivers of Africa, Homo sapiens became the only species to spread across the globe, beginning the story of civilization. When Homo sapiens began their journey out of Africa, the world they entered was not empty. The vast lands of West Asia and Europe had already been inhabited by Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. They were resilient hunters, superbly adapted to the icy climate and dense northern forests. Further east, in the valleys and caves of Siberia, another group, the Denisovans, had also taken root in that challenging landscape. Thus, when Homo sapiens ventured out of Africa, they stepped into a world already crowded with their cousins. What is remarkable is that these encounters were not merely about conflict. For centuries, familiar depictions in books described Neanderthals as clumsy, less intelligent, and inevitably replaced. But modern archaeological and genetic evidence has rewritten the story. Bones, teeth, and especially DNA data show that between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, Denisovans, the relationships were far more complex, involving competition, coexistence, and even love. In 2010, the first Neanderthal genome was published, marking a major turning point in science. Researchers discovered that modern humans with origins outside Africa carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. This is not a faint trace, but evidence of repeated interbreeding between the two species. These bonds were strong enough to leave a lasting legacy, to the point that today, each of us, those with ancestors from Europe or Asia, still carry within us that biological memory. Another groundbreaking discovery came from Denisova Cave in Siberia. From a tiny bone fragment, scientists decoded the genome of a previously unknown human species, the Denisovans. Moreover, they found traces of a girl whose mother was Neanderthal and father was Denisovan. This proves that not only Homo sapiens interbred with their relatives, but these cousin groups themselves were also connected. The human family tree, therefore, is no longer a simple straight line, but a tangled network where branches overlap, connect, and diverge. The genetic story also shows that these interbreeding events were not just brief episodes, but had profound evolutionary impact. From Neanderthals, Homo sapiens inherited genes that regulate skin and hair pigmentation and, most importantly, strengthen the immune system, crucial for facing entirely new pathogens outside Africa. From Denisovans, one of the most striking genetic gifts was adaptation to high altitudes, enabling Tibetans to survive in the Himalayas, where the thin air makes it nearly impossible for most life forms to endure for long. These advantages were significant. They were the biological toolkit that allowed Homo sapiens to expand into lands that would otherwise have been too harsh. However, the genetic legacy was not only a blessing. Some gene variants from Neanderthals and Denisovans are associated with modern diseases such as diabetes, lupus, or psychological disorders. Traits that once provided advantages during the Ice Age, such as powerful energy storage mechanisms, can become burdens in an age of food abundance. Evolution is always a balance. No gift comes entirely free. Nevertheless, overall, this blending enriched humanity. It shows that Homo sapiens did not evolve in isolation, but were once part of a larger community of the human family. In those encounters, there may have been clashes over territory, but surely also moments of coexistence, sharing campfires, hunting together, and giving birth to children of mixed blood. This also opens up a new perspective on culture. It is difficult to directly prove that Homo sapiens learned tools or techniques from Neanderthals, but their coexistence in the same periods leads researchers to believe that silent exchanges took place. The similarities in certain stone tool styles or signs of art and symbolism may reflect a process of borrowing or mutual influence. If so, then human civilization was not built solely by the effort of a single species, but through the quiet cooperation of many contemporaneous human lineages. Perhaps more important is the spiritual meaning, recognizing that within every modern human lies a fragment of those lost relatives. We did not completely replace them, but are a continuation, carrying fragments of their biological and cultural memory. This is what makes human history polyphonic and colorful, instead of a monotonous epic. Looking broadly, the story of Neanderthals and Denisovans reminds us that diversity, integration, and the ability to connect have always been keys to survival. If Homo sapiens had rejected all those connections, the rapid spread across the planet might never have happened. The genetic contributions from ancient relatives were like seeds falling into new soil, nurturing a humanity with extraordinary resilience, capable of moving from the African deserts to the Indonesian jungles, from frozen Siberia to the Tibetan plateau. And precisely by understanding that we ourselves are the product of those connections, we see more clearly that human history is not only the story of Homo sapiens, but a collective symphony in which each branch contributed a melody, short-lived but indispensable, to create today's evolutionary song. The slow evolution of Homo sapiens is not only recorded in bones or stone tools, but also etched deeply in spiritual signs, where imagination and the ability to express began to ignite the flame of difference. If tools helped humans survive, then language and art helped them exist in a complete way. Here, the miracle does not lie in the leaps of evolution, but in each slow, steady step accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years to shape who we are today. The interactions between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals or Denisovans are evidence that humanity did not grow up in isolation. Every encounter, every exchange of genes, or even just a small borrowing of tools or hunting customs became an important link. We are not nature's only child, but the result of a shared genealogy, where sibling species together wove the tapestry of evolution. It was precisely this blending that created strength, a genome rich in diversity, capable of resisting disease, harsh climates, and an ever-changing environment. Then came a turning point, when fragmented sounds turned into language. Not just simple herd calls, but sequences of symbols capable of carrying memory and aspiration. From that moment, the intelligence of Homo sapiens was liberated. Humans did not only live for the present, but also knew how to recount the past and imagine the future. Language became the bridge connecting minds together, transforming individual knowledge into collective wealth. From then on, a discovery no longer died with its finder, but could be passed down to descendants, nurturing new advances. Alongside language came art, the voice of the soul. When the first drawings appeared in caves, Homo sapiens stepped out of the confines of mere survival. A deer painted on the rock wall was not only a depiction of prey, but also a symbol of abundance, of the desire to master nature, and of imagination that transcends the visible. It was in that very moment that humans began to create the world a second time, the world of symbols, of spirit, where matter became signs imbued with meaning. What is astonishing is that, in the cold darkness of deep caves, our ancestors lit up an inner universe. They knew how to mix colors from red earth and black charcoal, how to use the curves of cave walls to create a sense of movement, how to carve statues, blow flutes, so that music resounded like a second form of language. These acts did not feed the belly, but they nourished the soul, the very thing that turned Homo sapiens into a creature that knows how to dream. And it was precisely dreams, beliefs, imagination that laid the foundation of culture. When we look at the paintings of Lascaux or Chauvet, we do not just see prehistoric animals, but also the seeds of civilization, observation, abstraction, and the need to preserve collective memory. This was the step forward that sibling species seemed never to have reached. Neanderthals may have once spoken, once sung, but Homo sapiens pushed symbols further, turning them into systems, into spiritual heritage. The emergence of language and art also transformed social structure. Groups were no longer bound only by blood, but by shared stories, rituals, collective beliefs. Culture became the invisible glue binding larger communities, paving the way for greater cooperation, for larger tribes, and later for civilization. From a small band living by hunting and gathering, Homo sapiens were preparing to become the species capable of building cities, creating religions, and writing epics. Yet, the miracle lies not only in the outcome, but in the journey. The evolution of Homo sapiens was slow, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years, but it was rich in value. It reminds us that the greatest things do not come overnight. It was thanks to perseverance that tiny changes, from the shape of the hyoid bone in the throat, the expansion of the Broca's area in the brain, to the habit of decorating with seashells, accumulated and layered to create the ability for language and symbolic thought. And when all those pieces came together, a spiritual explosion occurred. Humans learned to speak, to dream, to tell stories. Today, when we hold a pen to write, type on a keyboard, or simply whisper a word, we are extending that journey. In every letter, every melody, every modern cultural symbol still echoes the voices of our distant ancestors. Slow evolution has left us with the most miraculous gift, the power to transform thought into words, memory into symbols, and survival into civilization. When humans began to settle permanently, the world seemed to open up before them in ways never experienced before. No longer forced to constantly follow the movements of herds or water sources, they could observe nature and think more deeply about the relationship between humans and the environment. Staying in one place brought a sense of security, but it also posed new challenges: how to balance with nature, maintain food supplies, protect the community, and at the same time preserve the spiritual values formed over generations. The first villages were not only shelters, but also centers of thought, creativity, and cultural symbolism. In these early settlements, humans began to cautiously develop agricultural skills. They realized that sowing seeds not only stabilized food sources, but also opened up possibilities for storage, exchange, and cooperation with neighboring groups. Grains and cereals were not merely food, they were signs of a profound shift in how humans perceived the world. A seed planted today would become the meal for the entire season and, at the same time, the seed of the future, both biologically and culturally. Alongside material stability, spiritual life also flourished. Collective rituals, lively and vibrant in spaces like Göbekli Tepe, became points of community cohesion. Humans began forming systems of beliefs, myths, and shared memories. Every gathering around the fire, every song sung or story told of ancestors served not only for entertainment, but also to strengthen social bonds and initiate a long-lasting cultural structure. Settled spaces thus became launch pads for imagination and art, where ideas could be transmitted from generation to generation, transcending the limits of individual memory. A notable feature of this period was the appearance of more sophisticated tools and objects. No longer only roughly chipped stones, but knives, sickles, grinding stones, and even for decorations such as necklaces, rings, or carved bones. These objects served not only survival needs, but also conveyed messages of power, social roles, and aesthetic concepts. Decorating homes and even pathways within the village reflected a desire for beauty to mark identity and leave a personal imprint on the material world. Remarkably, in these early settled communities, humans began to observe and learn from each other systematically. Children were taught how to sow seeds, hunt, and craft tools. Elders passed down stories, lessons, and rituals. Artisans shared experience in carving, jewelry making, or musical instrument crafting. As a result, knowledge was no longer confined to individuals, but became a shared asset, a living network of knowledge, continuously expanding spaces for learning and creativity. This was the greatest step in transforming nomadic humans into culturally rich communities. Music and language continued to develop alongside sedentary life. Bone flutes, animal skin drums, or stone percussion instruments produced sounds that conveyed emotion, messages, and community rules. Collective songs were not merely entertainment, but means to synchronize actions, coordinating during hunts, building projects, or rituals. Language became more sophisticated, had not only describing reality, but also enabling the exchange of abstract ideas, predicting the future, and remembering the past. This allowed humans to plan long term, beyond the scope of daily survival. Large architectural constructions, though still rudimentary, reflected planning and community organization capabilities. Stone circles, storage pits, wooden or stone houses demonstrated that humans understood the concept of shared space, collective rights, and responsibilities. Building public spaces was also linked to religion and belief, reinforcing cultural identity and creating historical and spiritual landmarks. These spaces laid the foundation for later complex societies where law, economy, art, and religion coexisted and interacted. Additionally, stability fostered creativity in art and symbolism. Art was no longer confined to distant caves, but spread to settlements, houses, and public spaces. Wall paintings, small sculptures, and personal decorations became ways for humans to express themselves, mark their presence, and transmit beliefs. These symbols were not only aesthetically pleasing, but also educational tools, reminding generations of traditions, ethics, and the relationship with nature. Particularly, the practice of storing and preserving food created a new link between humans and the environment. Observing plant growth cycles, herds, water seasons, and weather enabled them to predict and prepare. The world was no longer a sequence of random events, but a structure that could be understood, anticipated, and interacted with. They learned to manage time naturally, planning for crops, hunting, and rituals, creating a cultural rhythm connected to nature. Through all these changes, it is evident that Homo sapiens began building a world where material, spiritual, and symbolic aspects intertwined. Life was not only about survival, but also about art, ritual, creativity, and social connection. They created cultural foundations where values, beliefs, and knowledge were transmitted from one generation to the next. From planted seeds, musical rhythms, to statues and stone circles, all told a story. Humans had stepped beyond mere existence to create a meaningful world, a proto-civilization built from imagination, the desire to connect, and infinite creative capacity.